Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Syntax Sugar Stream. I am April, and I am here to help you learn Python. So let's dive right into it. Last Tuesday, which is the Tuesday we just had, was the very first stream for Syntax Sugar. And in that stream, I went through how to set up your Python developer environment. And so, if you're brand new to Python programming and you don't know what it is that you need to have set up and such, no worries. Definitely keep tuning in to this stream if you're catching this live. But what I do recommend is that you head back over to the very first stream for your Python dev environment setup and check that one out because I take you through the steps of what you need to download, install. We do a brief little tour of Visual Studio Code and how you can set that up and customize it as well. We download and install Python. We even write just a little bit of Python code. And then in addition to that, we also take a look at one of my favorite AI coding assistants, GitHub Copilot, and I show you what it's like to use that tool for programming and asking your programming questions. And I also show you how you can add custom instructions to GitHub Copilot so that way GitHub Copilot can act more like a tutor and help you in your learning journey as opposed to just straight giving you answers. It's almost like having a teacher right there in Visual Studio Code. So for today's stream, what we are going to do is start to learn how to code in Python. As a reminder, Syntax Sugar Stream, we focus on one concept at a time per stream. I'm not going to overload you with a lot of concepts at once. Why? Well, I don't see the need to. You can always go and look at a certain stream for a certain topic if you want to dive into those any deeper than whatever it is that wherever else you may be learning, for example. Now, we do have a repository available for this stream. I'm going to take you to that as well. So the repo is here, and I keep this updated. At the end of each stream, I post, or even now, I have resources available for you in this repository. I'm going to place that in the chat for folks. But this is where you can come and find all of the code that I share for the stream. So if I scroll down in here and looking at the README itself, this is where you can find all the upcoming streams that are happening in case you're curious as to what other topics I'm going to be getting into. I do 2 streams a week. So this week we did environment setup, and now today variables and data types. And then you can see the other streams as well. You can kind of do the math to figure out which date I'm doing what. But as we approach the next 2 streams, I'll always update the directory for that stream with a good amount of resources that I think you'll find helpful. Also, at the very bottom, I have a link to the AI prompting guide. This prompting guide is going to be so helpful if you're using tools like GitHub Copilot to chat with it. However, it's not only for GitHub Copilot. You can also use the prompting guide for any other AI coding assistants that you're using as well. This is just guidance on how to communicate with AI to hopefully get the answers that you want. And then just below that, ways you can support this stream. You can star this repository so you can always know where to go and find it. And then please do share this stream with friends. I have seen some folks share this and tag other people on LinkedIn so they can tune in as well. And then also, if you would like to donate to the stream, you are more than welcome to do that as well. I have a Buy Me a Coffee link at the very bottom there. Your streams or your support keeps the streams going. All right, so in terms of what's in this repo, just so you're aware what's happening in here, within the streams directory, you'll be able to find a directory or a subdirectory for each stream. And so as I mentioned, as new streams come up, I'll update this accordingly. But for today's streams, for variables and data types, if you select on there, what you'll find in there is a README. Every stream has this. And in this README, it gives you an idea of what we will be going over in the stream itself. If there's any prerequisites, that's also going to be here too. And then I dive into the topics that we're going to be covering. So if you are in the midst of learning Python or you come across this repo later on down the road and you're like, oh, I really want to learn more or see someone teach whatever XYZ topic is, and you land here on my repo or my YouTube channel, you can come to the repo, look to see what we went through, and then tune into that stream. All these streams are going to be available for watching well after I've done the live stream itself. So you will always have access to this. And I also provide some additional resources that are relevant to that particular stream. So this is a very curated list of resources that I provide. Okay. And then there's this code folder. So in the code directory, you're going to find all of the code files that I go over in the stream itself. So if you want to follow along, my best recommendation is to go to this repository in advance so that way you can have the code. And then from there, we'll be going file by file, and you can always come back to this later as well if you want just a reference or to just test things out on your own in practice. So I wanted to make sure that you were aware that these resources do exist for this stream. If you ever have any questions, come find me on LinkedIn or Instagram Threads. On LinkedIn, I'm April Gittins. On Threads, I am Pretty Wired Builds, which is this YouTube channel as well. And you can always just leave a comment. I will definitely get back to you. So, what we're going to be focusing on today is learning about variables and data types. This I feel to be the very beginning foundation of getting started with Python programming. We're using Visual Studio Code as our code editor. It's not the only code editor available on the market. There are others, but for this stream, we're using VS Code because I'm a super big fan of Visual Studio Code. And so with that said, I'm going to actually head over into VS Code and let's go ahead and get started. So in Visual Studio Code, what do we have today? What do we have today? All right. I started getting ahead of myself earlier, which is testing some things out, which is all right. But we are going to kick things off in a brand new directory. I have one already open. It's called variables data types. You can name your directory whatever you want, but this directory is where we're going to be placing our Python files. I did bring over those files that I mentioned earlier that are in the repository, so that's what you can see here. So if you're wondering where those are. But as a reminder, if you're not sure how to open up a new folder, or if you've already been doing some things in VS Code, you're not sure now how to go create this new workspace for yourself, you'll go to File, and then you can then from there go to New Window, and then that'll give you a new window. You also have the option to close this folder that might already be open and then create a brand new one. So that's just as a gentle reminder for that. So I have one already here. And what we're actually going to do is create a brand new file so that way we're all aware of how to create new files in here, especially ones for Python. Last stream I mentioned that Python files end in a .py extension. And so if we see here on the screen, the files that I have listed all end in .py. Anytime you see a file that says .py, that means it's a Python file. Visual Studio Code also knows it's a Python file. If you open up one, some of the different options on the screen will change accordingly. So for example, opening this variables ones, not sure if you noticed, but at the very bottom of the screen, we have some more options that are available, including what is called the Python interpreter. And so last stream I mentioned if you happen to be on a Mac, you want to make sure that you are using the latest version of Python that you've installed. And so if you're not sure whether you are, at the very bottom, let me move my face because I am blocking this. At the very bottom, we have the interpreter selector, if you will, but it also indicates which interpreter is selected. If you click on that, this is where you can come and choose the version of Python that you want to use for your particular coding session, all right? I'm using Python 3.13.12 in case you're curious, and I downloaded mine from the Microsoft Store since I happen to be on Windows. I also have a Mac, but I'm not connected to that right now, but trust me, works beautifully on Mac as well. All right, so let's head back to what I wanted to do, and that's just to start you all off with just how to create a brand new file. We'll start things there, and then we'll head into all these other lovely files that I have listed. So, oh, we have someone in the chat. Hello, cool stuff. Keep it up. Thank you. I appreciate that. All right, so we're going to create a brand new file. It is going to be called Hello World. So, for those who are new to programming in general, Hello World is a phrase that new developers or developers have learned when they're learning a brand new programming language. It extends beyond just learning programming languages, but because we're learning Python today, we're going to think of it in the context of learning a new programming language. Typically with Hello World is when you're going to output Hello World, and we're outputting it to a place called the terminal. Now, the terminal can sometimes be a little bit of a challenge for some folks who have never done anything with the command line, but in this stream, don't worry. I'm here to give you any command that you're going to need in order to use the command line. So, here in Visual Studio Code, we'll create a brand new file. It'll be a Python file. And next to the folder name you have open, you should see a little icon that says New File. I'm going to call this just helloworld.py and press enter. Once you press enter, it's going to open it up in Visual Studio Code. So when that is open, you may notice that I may have some stuff on my screen that you may not have. If you've installed the GitHub Copilot extension, for example, 9 times out of 10, you're probably going to see something maybe similar here as well. And we'll dive into the GitHub Copilot chat later towards the end of the stream, because I'll show you how you can use a tool like that to help you with unblocking yourself if you happen to get stuck on something. So in any case, here in Hello World, just click in here. What we're going to do is write our very first Python script. If you're brand new, this will be your first one. If you tuned in on Tuesday, you've probably already done this. But for those who's the first time, I want to give you a moment to write your first thing too. What we're going to do with Hello World is output the phrase Hello World. Where do we output that? It's going to go to the terminal. But before we get there, let's go over how the structure looks to do that. So what you'll do is type in print. You'll notice here on the left-hand side, I start to get something that pops up. So this is essentially providing me a reference, for example, of the print function. Print's known to be a function here in Python. It's going to execute something. And in our case, we want it to execute some words, and we want that to output to the terminal. If you ever get stuck in using any Python functions or anything like that, you can always rely on seeing that pop up here in VS Code, assuming you've also installed the Python extension as well. If you don't know what that is, check out the first stream. I go over all of that. In any case, print's a function. It's going to perform some action. With functions, you call them, and you can also pass in information into the function. And whatever gets passed in, it becomes part of whatever that action is the function is doing. Now, for functions, you'll know it's a function, call specifically, when you also see these parentheses next to it. So I just did one left parentheses, and you may notice it automatically gave me the right one as well. It's also trying to assume what I'm going to place in the middle, which happens to actually be Hello World. But even though I have these hints or guesses, if you will, of what I'm going to type, when I'm learning something new, especially if it's a new programming language, I recommend taking the effort to still type things out. It's going to help build that muscle memory. We don't want to become too over-reliant on all these different AI tools that we have available to us. While it can make us faster and eventually, yes, I will say, use those to your advantage, While you're learning, we don't want to short ourselves in the learning process. It's one thing to see the code, it's another to comprehend it. And we want to comprehend whatever we're learning. So that way we don't become our own biggest blocker once we become a more experienced developer. And all right, I see that we have someone else who has also joined the chat. Glad that you've made it. And thank you for loving the streams. I'm glad you find them inspiring. All right, so far we've set up what would be a function call. Now, as I mentioned, we can pass something into the function call itself. And so I want to pass in the phrase hello world. Well, to do that, what we'll first do is put some double quotes in here. And adding the double quotes lets this function, or I guess in this case, it lets the interpreter know that we are going to output whatever is between those quotes. In Python, you can do double quotes or single quotes, but you're not going to do both of them. You can do either or, but never both. And when you would choose one over the other has their purposes, and we'll look at some of those a little later. From here, because we're typing and we're not just letting AI do all the work for us, I'm going to type in the phrase hello world. You'll notice that the recommendation it gave has gone away now. And then that's it. That's all I want to do. I'm going to put that in here. And what you should have on your screen, if you're following along, should look something like what I have that says print, and then double quotes, and hello world is right in the middle. All right. Now from here, we need to save this file. Anytime you make updates to a file here in Visual Studio Code, you want to save it before you run it. You'll know that it needs to be saved because on the left-hand side in the sidebar, you'll see a piece of paper with a number on it. That number keeps count of how many files have been modified, but they haven't been saved yet. So to save it, I love to use Visual Studio Code shortcuts. Highly recommend you give those a try. They are going to make you faster. If you're on a Windows, it'll be Control S. If you're on a Mac, it'll be Command S. So Control S is going to save this file. You'll notice now that that number is gone. That means this file has been saved. So from here, what I want to do is open up the terminal because we want to print this out. So my screen's a little shortened, so my full navigation at the top has been shortened, but these triple dots will give me access to the other file or the other menu options. We're going to go to Terminal and New Terminal, and you'll notice that we have a shortcut for this. In Visual Studio Code, any shortcuts that are available or assigned to a certain action, the shortcut's going to display to the right of it. I'll just click it in this case, and then let me hide my face because my big head's in the way. So here in Visual Studio Code, what I want to do is run this. And so I am in what is now called the terminal. I happen to be using PowerShell. If you are on a Mac, it's not going to say PowerShell, it'll say something else instead. But in any case, we can run this. And there's multiple ways to run files in Visual Studio Code. You can click the little play icon, it'll automatically run it. Alternatively, if you want to have some experience or exercise with the command line, you'll type in Python, type that first, and then the file name itself. And in my case, this file is called helloworld.py. Include the extension. So when you go to run this, it outputs the phrase itself, hello world, directly to the terminal. If this is the first thing you've ever written, congratulations. You are a Python programmer now. No matter how long you've been doing it, you're a Python programmer, and you're going to continue to build up those skills. But there's a couple of key things I want to call out here before we start diving into variables and data types. Notice that I was able to type in Python before I gave the file name, and it worked beautifully. If you just gave this a try and you get an error saying something to the effect of Python's not recognized, for example, that means during your Python installation, you did not add Python to path. And so you will need to go back and figure out what is it that needs to be updated to make that change. It will involve a little bit of the command line. I'm just going to tell you that right now. It'll involve some things, but if you use something like GitHub Copilot to help you, ChatGPT, Claude, you name it, they'll all give you a similar answer on how to resolve that. And so that's what you would need to do. So that's just a disclaimer. If you just ran this and you're like, oh my gosh, it didn't work. Okay, so this is a hello world file or a hello world example at its very simplest. This is how you write in Python. Well, it's a little bit of how you code in Python. There's so much more you can do with Python. And that's what we're going to start diving into. All right. So let's take a look at variables. Now, variables, you can consider them to be labeled containers for data. And so what do I mean by that? Right now I'm in the variables.py file if you're going to find the files that are in the repository. And we'll start here with this one. And let me make this just a little bigger for everyone. Okay, so in this variables.py files, I have 4 lines here of actual code. Then I have a couple of lines of things that aren't going to run. And those things are going to be in comments, and we'll get into comments in just a second. But let's focus on variables right now. So this first line, or the second line for line 2 says name equals, and then it says quotes April. There's those quotes again. And notice that I'm using double quotes in this case. I'm not using the single quotes, but it works all the same. I can change this instead to be single quote April. And what I cannot do, however, is double quote April, single quote. All right, we don't want that. And so instead, we're going to do either double quotes or single quotes. But essentially, in this example, name is the variable, and then April is the value or the data that is assigned to this particular variable. Now, this one's a very obvious example of what a name could be. When you are naming your variables, I do recommend that you choose names that makes sense for the value that's going to be assigned or held by that particular variable. So in this case, a name variable, I would assume it would be a name value for that. And in this case, it's me, it's April. And then just below that, we have age, another variable. And so notice that with this one, I have a number on the right-hand side of the equal sign, but this doesn't have quotes. Now, this is a different data type, and we'll talk about those a bit more in a second. But this 35 next to my age is what's known as an integer. Integers are going to be whole numbers. And so a whole number, as a reminder, is any number that does not have a decimal point. So 35 in this case doesn't have quotes. For my height, 5'4", you'll also see that this one does not have quotes, but it also actually has a decimal point. And so for this particular variable, it's assigned to a data type that is known as a float. And we'll get into floats in just a bit. Now, with respect to this age variable and this height variable and the values that they both hold, these are numbers, and these numbers are not necessarily going to be considered what are known to be a string. So April is a string, and a string is text. All right? Now for age, it's a number. Height, it's a number. We'll go over in a bit what happens when you want to start combining these into a sentence. But for now, just know that April is a string because it's text. And then age is a number. Height is a number. Age is a whole number, which makes it an integer. And then height is going to be a float because it has that decimal point. And then finally, we have is underscore programmer equals true. That is also a variable, and you'll notice that you can write variables different ways. And so while the first 3 options don't have anything appended to it or pre-appended to it, that final option for is programmer, it has that underscore, and this is totally allowed in Python as well. Now, for this one, you'll see that the value assigned to it is true. And this is going to be known as a boolean, and we'll get into booleans in just a second. But booleans can only have 1 or 2 values, either true or false. That's it. And so in this case, my variable is programmer, is of the type boolean, and I am saying that it's true because as April, I am a programmer. And so if we want to now output these values to the terminal, What we will need to do is use that print function that we used over in the hello world example, which is where we began. Now, notice that as I scroll down here to line 7, within print, I pass in just the variable itself. But earlier, for the hello world example, if I open that one back up, you'll notice that I actually have hello world surrounded by quotes. Well, based on what I just shared with you back in variables, anytime you're going to add quotes around something, it's going to be a string. But because these variables are not strings, we can just pass them right into the print function itself. And what it's going to do is output the value that's assigned to that. So when I have on line 7, print, and then in parentheses, name, what that's going to do is print the value that's assigned to the name variable. The same occurs at line 8 for age, and then also for height for line 9, and then for is programmer, it'll print either true or false because, if you recall, booleans can only be true or false. Now, you may be wondering, why are lines 7 through 10 a bit more grayed out? They're not as prominent in terms of like the first couple of lines. And you may even notice that in line 1, that one's a little grayed out. These are what are known as comments. Anytime you have a comment in a Python file, it's not going to have any action taken on it when the interpreter does its thing to execute your Python code. You can have as many comments as your heart desires in Python, but there are best practices around using comments. Essentially, comments are there to help understand what's happening in the code. They're also there to ensure that certain code does not get executed when a Python file gets executed, all right? So with that said, if you want to uncomment something, it really is as simple as backspacing the comment. And now you'll see that print, and where we passed in name, has some color, just like the lines above. Now, a shortcut that I find to be super helpful for adding comments, removing comments, like a toggle, you can do control / or command / if you're on a Mac, and that'll automatically create the comment for you. When you start having a lot of things that you need to comment or uncomment, or if you're using someone else's code and instead of doing what is called a multi-line comment, which we'll look at in a second, they just have multiple individual lines with just that hash symbol, that command makes life so much easier because now you don't have to go each line and uncomment them manually. So as an example, I could highlight all these and then do control /, now they're all uncommented. And likewise, if I clicked it, if I do the same command again, it'll comment them. So that's just a little tip for those who are newer here. All right, so what I want to do now is actually start running these so we can see what the output is to the terminal. And so we'll start off with this print and name one. We're passing in the name variable. I'm going to open back up my terminal, and I think I can keep my head up this time. Hopefully it's not in the way. And we're going to run this file. But if you might see, I had this little number 1 up here. That means that someone didn't save their file yet. So we're going to go ahead and do Control S, Command S if you're on a Mac. And you can type in Python variables.py and we'll press enter. And it outputs my name, April. What it's outputting is so much more than just my name. It's outputting the string that's assigned to the name variable, or the value that's assigned to that variable. So very similar to what we did with the hello world when we just output a string. Now we're actually outputting the values that are assigned to these variables. The next thing that we have on here is going to be age. So let's see what happens when we go to print that one out. I think this time my head's in the way, so let me just get myself off the screen for a second. So what's great, I'm actually going to come back for a second. What's really great when using the terminal, and if you're not familiar with the terminal, again, that's totally cool because I'm here to help you out. If you happen to be in the same shell like we're in right now, instead of having to type Python variables.py all over again, and if you're already in here, you've already used that command, you can type the up arrow on your keyboard, and if my thing was in the right place, it'll remember the last command and you can just press enter. And it seems like I did something wrong. So let's try that again. If you use the up arrow, here we are, it'll remember that same command that you used before. I accidentally erased the .py, so sorry about that. And now I don't have to type this all over again. I can press enter and it runs that. But this time I actually didn't uncomment the age, the call, the print function when we did the age, we passed an age. So we need to uncomment that. And so let's try this again. Third time's a charm, y'all. We're gonna do up. I can see it's there, enter. And it looks like I didn't save it that time. So remember, always save, always save. If your terminal starts getting a little crowded, you can enter in clear if you're on Windows, CLS if you're on a Mac. I want to take myself off the screen so we can fully see what's happening in here right now for a second. So where we are right now is that I have the line 7 and 8 is uncommented. So I want to print the name and I want to print the age. So when I go to run this file or execute this file, not only does VS Code make it challenging to see this, let's do this. Here we go. I first have April appear, and then I also have 35 appear as well. So what this means is that you can print more than one thing to the terminal, and it's going to print in the order in which it is in the Python file, because Python code is going to be executed from top to bottom. Now for height, we can do the same exact thing. I'm gonna save it this time. And using that trick I told you earlier by pressing the up arrow, I'll be able to automatically get the command to run the file. And now I can see 5.4 has printed for my height. And then the final one that we want to do is programmer, okay? We're going to save that. And this time I'm actually going to press the little play button to run the Python file just so you can see what that experience is like. And in doing that, actually get a new shell over here. But it does print true as the very final line. So if you were just very curious to know, like, what happens if I press the play button? That's what happens, okay? So we have all of these variables printed to the terminal, and that's essentially how you can print variables to the terminal. You can pass them into a print function. Now, the last thing I have here underneath these print statements or these calls is going to be what is known as a multi-line comment. A multi-line comment is just as it's called. It's multiple lines of text, but they're all in a comment. Rather than having to put the hash symbol on each individual line, you can create as many lines as necessary, and you can surround them by triple quotes. That triple quote is made by just doing 3 single quotes at the beginning, 3 single quotes at the end. And you'll notice that this was not printed out, executed, nothing like that, because this multi-line comment is a comment. All right. So let us now move on out of the variables file, out of Hello World, and let's look at strings a little bit more. So I mentioned earlier strings is going to be text, okay? It could just be one string like the letter A. It could be a word like April. It could be a sentence like April Giddens is amazing. But in this case, in the examples that I have right now, I have the first. Oh, a question. Do I find myself using the play button to run my code or using the command line? When I first started with programming, I used the play button, and the reason why was because the command line terrified me, but then one day I realized I needed to get over that. So then I started learning the command line, and to get more comfortable with using it, I forced myself to type in the command itself in the command line. So It's been a couple years since I got started with Python, but I would say in the beginning I used the play button a lot, and then as I got more experience and also just that desire to understand the command line more, that's when I started doing the Python followed by the file name with the extension. So great question. Which, by the way, there's no wrong answer there. It's completely up to you in your own personal style. I personally now I just use the command line it's become muscle memory, I would say, for me. All right. So in this string, I have one called first underscore name, and it's going to be assigned to the value April. And then I have a last underscore name, which is assigned to the string Gittens, and you are very welcome. And then in below that, I have something that looks a little different. This one is a variable that says full underscore name, and it has the first name variable, which is great. And then it has this plus sign, and then it has these double quotes and a plus sign, and then the last name. So what is happening here? If you haven't guessed already, based on the comment at the top, this is what is known as string concatenation. And concatenation is when we are adding strings together. We concatenate with the plus sign. And so right now, if you want to take a guess as to what's going to happen when I pass in full name to the print function, you can. But I'll tell you, what's going to happen here is that it's going to combine the first name variable or the value assigned to first name with a space. So those two quotes that has nothing in the middle, that middle part represents a space. A space is going to be considered to be part of a string. And then we end it with the last name. So now when I print the full name itself, it's going to give me April Gittens. And because seeing is believing, we're going to take a look at that. Let me comment this out so that way we don't get too many things printed out here, and let's save that. And so we're going to come to the terminal, have that back open. You can keep the terminal open as well if you'd like. You may notice I have a couple of them going here, and we don't really need all these. Every time you open a new terminal, it literally opens a brand new terminal. And so you'll start collecting these at the up here, but you can click the little trash icon to get rid of them. So with that said, let's run this strings.py file, and we're going to see what happens when you do string concatenation. So I am going to do python strings.py, and I have an issue. Why is that? I forgot to comment out something that I know is going to be a problem later on. So let me go ahead and, comment these out for us. Keep this in mind if you're using the file as is from the repository. There are some things that I'll need to comment out, and then we'll try that again. All right. Nothing was wrong with what I wrote. I just didn't comment out the things below that I know have mistakes. And those are going to be examples that we'll go through in a second. So we're going to go ahead and run this one, python strings.py, and it concatenated the first name variable with a space, and then with April Gittens, or Gittens at the end. And the output that we're going to get is April space Gittens. You can do this with more than just like single word strings. It can be full sentences that you concatenate together as well. I'm going to comment this one out, and let's take a look at what else I have on here. So just below that, I have a common mistake that some folks may make. And we actually just saw what happens when someone makes this mistake. The age variable I have assigned as 35, or the value for that is 35, and that's an integer. Nothing's wrong with it being an integer. That's totally cool. Just below that, though, I have this message variable, and I've concatenated some strings, which you can concatenate strings without making them explicitly variables first, but I concatenated that with the age variable, and it gives you an error. I'm actually going to run this so you can see what happens when this is run. And what we can anticipate on seeing, it didn't like that time. Let's try adding in a print statement followed by message. Okay. So when we run that, we get this error. So what does this error actually even mean? Well, it tells us that we can only concatenate a string and not an int to a string. So we can concatenate a string to a string, but we cannot concatenate a string to an int. An int is going to be an integer. 35 is an integer. So what we need to do in order to run sentences like this is something that is going to be called type conversion that we'll look at in just a moment. But I want to let you see what are just some mistakes that could happen when you are doing string concatenation and you're combining things like strings and integers and floats. It's not that you can't combine them, you just need to convert them into a string in order to do so. So let's move on to these other file types we have here, and then we'll get into some string conversion in just a moment. So let's take a look at the integers file that I have. So as I mentioned, integers are, or it's going to be numbers.py. Integers are going to be whole numbers. And so as a reminder, age equal 35. 35 is an integer. There's no decimals. And then price is $13.99. And so that's going to be a float. And likewise, if we want to run this in our terminal, I should keep this open, but I'm so used to opening and closing it. And we'll go ahead and, oh, we don't really have this command already done. We can do numbers.py. Notice that I do not have these uncommented, so nothing would actually print. So let's uncomment these guys so that way we can actually see their output. And now if I run that, I have 35, which is the value that we have assigned to age, and then $13.99, which is the value that we have assigned to price. So those are going to be, again, your numbers, your integers, your floats. And so the next thing is the booleans, which we did talk about for a little bit. Those are your true, false values. And so in the example that I have here, is raining, I have set as true, even though it's not raining in California, but it's true. And then is sunny, I have set to false. So therefore, I can print something like the string, is it raining? But you'll notice now I have this comma in here, followed by the variable is raining. What's going to happen is that the is it raining is going to print, and then it'll also print the value of the Boolean as well. And so it's a different way of looking at doing string concatenation, sort of, I guess, not really. But essentially what we are outputting is the value that's assigned to the is raining variable. So let me just show you what that looks like in reality. So right now I have two print statements. Is it raining? Is it sunny? And we want to see what prints out. So I'm going to do Python followed by booleans.py. And as we can see, the string is it raining does get output, and the string is it sunny also gets output. But next to each of those, I also get the value that's for the Boolean value for both of these variables. And so I have true for the first, false for the second. So those are going to be your Boolean values. Now, if you're not sure what the type is for some of your Python data, you can do you can find that out by checking the type. All right. In my check type file, I'm going to close my terminal. I have these same values or variables you've seen earlier. Name, age, height is programmer. I have a string, a float, or a string, a integer, a float, and a Boolean value. And then just below, I have these print statements. What you'll notice in these print statements is that while they still are functions, they look a little different. We are passing in a function into this function call for print. And the function that we're going to be using is the type function. And when you use type, what you're going to do is pass in the parentheses the data or the variable in this case that you would like to use to get the type for. I just said a mouthful, so let me just show you what that means in action. So right now, inside my print function, I have another function called type, and inside that type function, I passed in the name variable. I'm going to save this so I can run this in my terminal. When I now go to run this file, if I do python check types.py, it tells me that this is the class of string. We'll get into classes way later down the line in this stream. But for now, in terms of this output that we got, it lets us know the data type. And str is going to be a string. Int is going to be a integer. And I believe float is just spelled as is. Boolean is going to be bool. And just to prove that, let's just look at all those. So I'm going to uncomment all those. Let's save it. Let's run that again. And as I can see here, we have str for the string. We know that name is a string, age is an integer, height is a float, and then the Boolean is going to be, is programmer, it's going to be bool. So if you ever want to check your types, this is how you can do so. All right, now, type conversion. If you recall earlier, when we were in our strings.py file, I was not able to concatenate this I am with age and years old because the error that we got was that you cannot concatenate a string and an integer. You can do a string to a string, however, and there is a way that you can do that, and that's going to be a type conversion. Now, anytime you want to convert one type into a different type, I'm in the conversions.py file now, in case you're wondering, what you are going to do is actually use a function. Programming's full of functions, just so you know. But in this case, the function itself is going to be the type that you want to actually convert it into. And what you're going to pass into that function is going to be the data itself. And so if we look at line 4 here, for example, I have age underscore str, and that's going to be equal to a string this time that says 35. So don't be tricked that this has the quotes. And then just below that, instead, I would like to have an age integer. And so for that, I have an integer function, and passed in there is the age string. So what we're doing here is a type conversion in which we are converting that string 35 to be an integer 35. Now this will not work if you're trying to convert a string into an integer. Python will be looking for those number values, all right? So let's go ahead and actually test out this first one where we're doing print of age and int. And let's save that. Go to my terminal and we'll go ahead and run python conversions.py, and now I get 35. And so it's done the conversion for me. Now, if we head back to that strings.py file from earlier where I just couldn't do the concatenation because I was trying to pass an integer into here. As a reminder, if you're curious as to what happened here, I'll clear this again and then I'll run this one. So python strings.py, we get this lovely error that tells us that we can't concatenate those two together. We can't concatenate a string and an integer. So what we have instead below, I provided what the fix would be. And the fix for this is going to be converting. We're using the string function, if you will, and we're passing in age. And so age is that variable that is definitely an integer. And now we're passing that into the full message variable itself. Now you'll see that there's two message variables that have been created here. And you might be wondering, well, shouldn't this still throw an error because the other message is still here? Not necessarily. Python, like I mentioned, runs top to bottom. And so while we did assign this concatenated string to the first message variable, we reassigned something later down the road. It happens to be on line 13 for us. And what Python is going to do is actually output what has been assigned to the second instance of this message variable. So now, because I have a properly converted integer to a string, when we go to run strings.python, I still have my error. Why do I have my error? Oh, because I didn't save the file. Always remember to save the file, everyone. That sometimes seems to be the reason that things don't work. Okay, so this time when we go to run strings.py, and I'm still getting an error. So let's see. It doesn't like this. Let's see what happens now. We're going to open up a whole new terminal. Here we go. All right. Third time's always a charm. So Python strings.py, and now it works beautifully. So we have I am 35 years old. That string conversion occurred for the age variable itself, and we are able to properly concatenate that and output that. All right. So that is what string conversion looks like. In the string conversion file, I do have other examples available in case you are curious and you want to see what other string conversions look like. The final thing I will leave you with is going to be some type errors that we discussed already. So in this case, what we're going to be doing is adding values, and we haven't gotten to addition yet. So when we get into that next week, this will be a bit more relevant, but you're more than welcome to start taking a look at this now. And then also we have some type mistakes, and I did go over this earlier, but I also included examples if you want to see for yourself what those mistakes look like in reality. The first one, for example, is having quotes around numbers. And so for age, if I assigned it to 25 with quotes around it, that is now a string. If I don't put quotes around it, this is going to be more appropriate for doing things like math, and now it is an integer. Another is for getting quotes on strings. And so in this case, name equals Alex. Well, Python is thinking Alex is a variable. So if you don't have any quotes around, let's say in this case, a word, Python will think it's a variable. So just below, when we add the quotes, whether it be single quotes or double quotes, it now becomes a string. And when we get into using or when it comes to naming your variables, you don't want to use reserved words. Reserved words are going to be words that already have a purpose and job in Python. So print, for example, recommended that you don't use those words. And you might be wondering, well, how do I know something's a reserved word? Python documentation is going to tell you that. It also becomes a thing that you start to learn over time as well. But there's a lot of words in Python, and this is where going through the documentation becomes helpful. The final thing is going to be type mixing, and this is going to be more relevant when we get more into addition. However, this final line that says 5 as a string plus 5 as a string, that's actually going to concatenate. It's not going to do 10, it's going to output 55 because it combined a 5 and a 5, all right? So those are all the files that I have available for the stream, this particular data types and variables stream. The last thing that I want to show you is just using AI to help you with any issues that you might run into. So as an example, let's take this one. Now, in the event that you are not necessarily sure why something is an issue in Python and you're stuck and you don't have someone that you can go to and ask, you could always use AI to get an idea of what's going on. So in my chat right now, let me move my head, I have GitHub Copilot pulled up. And in here, what you can do is type in your questions. And in this case, I'm taking that 5 as a string plus 5. And I can say, I got this error. And you can paste it in. And you can ask, what does it mean? whatever AI assistant you choose to use, it's going to be able to help you with understanding what's going on here. This is how, when I'm learning anything around programming, this is how I personally like to use AI. And at this phase, I'm not too big on using it to give me answers on how to do everything. I use it more as a learning aid. And as we can see here, if I open this up fully, what we have is an understanding or an explanation of why this is an error. So again, I don't want you to shy away from using AI. I think it's a very helpful tool. While you're learning, however, I do encourage you to try to do as much as you can on your own, but leverage AI for those moments where you have a question and you're not quite sure why something's happening a certain way, all right? I didn't have that luxury when I first started learning how to code. And so I am so glad that this is available today. I was one of those people that had to use Stack Overflow back in the day, which seems like it was so long ago. But this is where AI definitely becomes super helpful. All right. So I have a question from T Coder, and this is going to be the last and only question I take because now I'm going to have to head into a meeting here soon. But it says, can you talk about the convention of naming a bool variable? And so the example provided is that there's a lot of bool variable names like is something. So I will say this comes back to what I mentioned earlier about choosing your variable names. You want your variable names to be something as close to explicitly obvious as to what it is, because if someone else happens to be reading your code, they will be able to identify that something is a Boolean. If you put something like is and then underscore whatever next to it, it makes your code easier to read, if anything. Now, the Python itself won't know by putting in that is first that it's a Boolean, but for the humans that are reading your code, doing that naming convention of is underscore whatever, it's a easier way to identify that something is a Boolean. And so while you don't have to do that, I'm sure if anyone's reading your code, they'll be thankful that you've chosen to do that. All right. Hopefully that was helpful. And yeah, that brings us to the end of our stream. I really thank you for tuning in, whether you're live or you're watching this later down the road. I'll be back on Tuesday with another Syntax Sugar stream. And I forget what I'm covering Tuesday. Let me go to the repo really quick. Let me see. I'm forgetting I have this lovely screen in front of me. Let's pull up the repo. So on Tuesday, I am going to be covering. Oh, thank you for enjoying it. Basic operators. I hope you like math because we're going to be doing some math. And if you know PEMDAS, which is please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, or parentheses, exponents, multiplication, please excuse my dear division, addition and subtraction, then you're in for a treat because we're going to be learning how to do math operations with Python, as well as one that you may have never heard of before called Modulo. All right. Again, thank you for tuning in. You can find this repository. I'll put in the chat, the link to it. But really enjoyed my time with you all. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you on Tuesday. Take care.